What were your first impressions when you were learning the Saito method?
Well, my first, let's say, the first technique that I learned when I was at university, and I had really not been in any ensembles prior to that time, so I couldn't even speak to anybody before that. And I conducted just like I was taught there, if you like, or from watching people there. And then when I studied the Kodai concept, I took more conducting from the Hungarians. And I would describe most of their conducting that I learned from them being more Haniagi. And it was more choral based, if you like. And then when I started with the youth orchestra, Wayne would advise me about things like about how to move my arm. And I think I took a course then, and I struggled very much. Took it again and continued to struggle. And the third time, I think after being in youth orchestra and working with Wayne, I had this other set of motions to imitate and follow. And the last time I was able to work with Professor Okabe, I was more interested in watching him conduct and like sort of getting that final, like what does he do with his arm, and then trying to understand how he could be so relaxed about everything. But it's been, and I keep learning, let's put it that way. Like there are times I will do I'll be conducting and my arm will do something, and I will ask myself, my metacognitive side will say, okay, where did that come from? And I'll realize I might have seen it before, but I find myself, I hear things and my arm does things.
Mm-hmm.
So you say Wayne was telling you to make adjustments. So did Wayne take the workshop before you originally?
Yes, he did. You have to ask him to clarify. I know that he went out to, I think it was the BC of British Columbia, and took it there the first time that he took it. At least, yes, I think that's where it was.
And then you guys were friends, and then he would give you like little pointers.
Yes.
Did he ever try to teach you specific Saito stuff back then?
Trying to remember. He would show me gestures, yes. Actually, I remember, coming up beside me and saying, make the fourth beat longer. Right. So little suggestions in rehearsal and things like that.
But it wasn't
vocabulary back then?
That was my question.
Wait, pardon?
Did he ever give you vocabulary back then?
I think, I started learning the vocabulary more the first time I took the course when Professor Okabe was here.
Oh. Interesting. Then how did you first actually learn the method?
Well, I think the first time, watching Wayne was part of it, and then watching Professor Okabe when he came was probably, watching Professor Okabe was like watching the master. Like he would do things, and the way he would move, and that's why I was so impressed was that he could show everything he wanted so clearly with his gestures. And that's not to say there was a lack of clarity with Wayne. It was just that Professor Okabe was just, a much higher and much more, there was a clarity to his conducting that was just phenomenal. So.
Just saying it was about the clarity of what you see. And I think you said that you see some people doing it who haven't taken the workshop.
Well, I see certain conductors who do certain things, let's put it that way, but I don't necessarily see. One of those things that I think is really important is waiting and letting players play, and sort of preparing them for the next thing that's coming. And I know a couple of conductors where I see that kind of thing happening. But like I say, I watch conductors who, you listen to a group, or I watch YouTube videos, and you understand the group doesn't enter together, or doesn't start together, or doesn't arrive at a certain place together, and you realize it's because nobody was really certain visually by watching the conductor where that point was. And I think that that's one of the major things about the Saito method, is that it's about being very clear about when people are to make the sound that you would like to hear.
And what was the first workshop like for you?
An exercise in frustration. It was the very first time I did this, I felt completely lost and frustrated. Um, so the major difference over the time that we've done this is I think that Wayne has Wayne Toews has done a fantastic job in breaking down and sort of taking smaller pieces. But it also has to do with the styles of learning. So in Japan, apparently learning is done very much by observing and repeating and observing and repeating. And here we rely more on some explanations and visual diagrams and things like that. So by breaking things down, as we have done here, so doing exercises that are specifically shakuin, like how do you beat three, sort of a 3-4 pattern using shakuin, and all you do is beat that pattern until you get better and better at it. There's another school of thought that says, well, yes, you apply that to study number one. Well, you can do that with study number one to a certain point, but being able to take smaller pieces, if you like, that sort of lets you focus more strongly on something, an aspect of the method that you can concentrate on.
Mm-hmm. So, in your experience with working with a wide variety of different ensembles, how long does it typically take for an ensemble that you're new to get used to Saito conducting? Do they figure it out right away?
Well, sometimes sometimes they do. Typically, I will notice when someone is new to my groups that they don't respond in the same way as those that have been with me longer, because the people that have been with me longer know that when we get to certain places in the music, ritardandi, accelerandi, that if they don't watch, they will not be with me. And so I've seen times when people will they'll look up because all of a sudden they realize they're not with the rest of the group, and the reason was that they weren't watching. And but I'm very lucky to have the people I have to work with, but they do look up. And when they look up, it's really quite amazing, the people that have been with me for some time, how they literally subdivide with me, and there's no communication except for the baton. It's quite incredible, actually, how that happened. And there are times when if I get the feeling that the group on a particular evening isn't paying much attention, I will make alterations to the things that I'm doing just so that it reminds them they need to look up once in a while. And that's all it takes, actually. So, yeah.
So you said when you first started learning it, you learned it, Wayne gave you some tips on it first, and then you took a workshop with Professor Okabe, right?
Yes.
And before that, you studied at university.
Yes.
And then what was the big difference between what you learned at university and then when you started studying with Wayne and Professor Okabe?
Well, the one thing at the university we had, which was called Fundamentals of Conducting. I don't remember the title of the book anymore, but I remember I would stand up, and I would actually I would stand at a blackboard. Remember what blackboards are?
Yeah.
Do you know what blackboards are? Okay. So I would stand at the blackboard, and I'd actually draw the patterns with a piece of chalk to get a sense of, how to do things with my baton. But those patterns were simply patterns that had no acceleration, no deceleration. And so they were basic patterns, but there was nothing helpful about them, I don't think, in any way, except, being a visual metronome.
Yeah. When I talk to American conducting professors, it seems to be the biggest difference is in Saito, it's all about changes in momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And in the way it's taught in university, it's all about a pattern. But then when you talk to professors, they'll get defensive and say, oh, we don't use patterns. And sometimes they'll they'll try to show the phrase intuitively rather than with a method.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair? Or
Yes, no, I think I understand where they're coming from with some of that. And it's not that it's incorrect to try and show, if they're trying to step away from an established pattern to show something more musical, that uh, I would say there's nothing wrong with that. I think that as long as the players know as long as you're getting what your musical intention is by doing that, I suppose there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, there are some conductors that are very clear that don't necessarily follow the Saito method, but this is the one I prefer. Let's put it that way, and I will. And there are times when I do things, I think, okay, was I sort of moving away from what I should be doing? I might make circles more often than I used to, if I think if it works. I think what's important is that to be able to go back. It's another one of those things. When you know the rules, you can break them.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of along that line. And sort of too, earlier you had mentioned that sometimes you'll do a gesture and you'll be like, oh, well, where'd that kind of come from? Have you had to create a lot of your own gestures in the repertoire you've done, or have you mostly found that you stick to what's kind of in the textbook?
I would have to say that most of what's in the textbook solves most of my problems. Yeah. I can, if I was to give one really specific example of the difference between how I conducted when I first started and now, is that there was a time when if my group started to speed up on me, usually probably because my fourth beat or the last beat of each measure was too short, I was helpless. I could only hang on in terror and hope that it didn't completely fall apart. And now that I can do this, I have never had that feeling. Well, I've had it maybe once in 20 years where something was speeding up and there was nothing I could do but hang on. But generally speaking, I'm not concerned about those things anymore, because I can speed my group up if I need to, and I can slow them down if I need to, and I can do it just with my arm, and I know exactly how to do it. So as soon as I start to feel anything happening, I can make an adjustment to what I'm doing so that it brings the tempo to where I think it needs to be.
What gesture would you use to if they're speeding up, what gesture do you use to keep them in time?
If I'm in 4/4, I lengthen the last beat of the measure. My rule to all my groups, as I say to them, is as long as my arm is going up, you're not allowed to cross the bar line. So by lengthening the last beat of the measure, that's the place I would start first to start slowing them down again. But you could probably lengthen every one of them. But and I've had some situations within the last year or so where there was a bit of a tendency to speed up, and all I did was my gesture got much bigger, and my the last beat of the measure got much longer. So again, get their attention, and like I said, as long as you're moving upward, we're not at one yet, folks. So
do you do the opposite if you want them to go faster?
To accelerate, Tataki is not the most useful way of creating acceleration. So generally, if I want things to speed up, I usually head into Hanyage type motions.
Yeah, it's funny because most people who haven't studied Saito will do the exact opposite. They'll do more of a Tataki motion if they want to speed up. When I see people try to speed up, they'll go like harder on the downbeats.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Mm-hmm.
When really the exact opposite, where you take out all acceleration into and just go from.
Yeah, I almost have to be careful sometime in 6/8, but I can speed up my group very quickly using Hanyage, from point motion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, my turn. So it's our system. How many people do you know that study the Saito method, and how far around the world has it traveled?
Wayne is more familiar with that than I probably am, but I know that we have had people come from Australia to work with Wayne, and of course we know that there are Americans have come, and people from Britain, and I think right now the last few years the course has been very successful in that it has been full, if you like. Um, I think it's probably when you start watching other conductors now, even though people that say they weren't necessarily following Saito methodology, I have been watching some things that look like it might elements of it are finding its way into mainstream conducting, whether people want to admit it or not. I'm not sure about what your perception is about watching other conductors, but I've seen things that sort of go, that looks like something I've seen before. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's probably, I think it's out there and it's moving around. But is it mainstream yet? I would say not.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What was it like taking the workshop with Professor Akabe versus Wayne?
Professor Okabe, of course, required a lot of his command of the English language was very limited, but he always. That was, I think, what was most interesting is that what he could not describe in words, he could do with gesture, and so, and it is not. I would have to say that one of the first things I learned, like the one thing that I picked up from the very first time I did the workshop was the concept of subdivision. I mean, Professor Okabe said that so many times over. That was one of the English words he knew, and he said it so many times. And I still find that it's one of those fundamental concepts, even when I'm out working with elementary bands, about having children or even the adults I work with, reminding them about subdivision and how subdividing solves so many of the problems that you run into, and that happens over and over and over and over again. Oh. So, working with Professor Okabe, he was, to me, he was very kind. He was very persistent. He was, well, like I said, he couldn't really tell you so much what he wanted. He had to show you. So that's why he would grab my arm and try to show me how to move my arm. Okay. But if you were to ask me, it was having the opportunity to watch him. And another thing that he would do that was very impressive was that he would conduct something one way, and then he would say another idea, and he would conduct it a different way, and then he would say another idea, and he would conduct it a different way, and each time he got a different result, all of them musical, but you could hear the difference in the line. You could hear the difference in the musical expression just by the way he moved his arms and the response of the pianists that we had working with us at that time. So he was so good to watch. I mean, I'm sorry that I keep thinking about how people in the course now didn't have that chance to watch him, but to watch him do some of the studies and how he would stand and throw his arm around and make all this fantastic music, and he looked so clear and it looked so easy. And yeah, maybe not. Yeah. So it took a while. I hope that answers your question. It's just, when he would get up and start, the music would suddenly, there was this whole, the music became wonderful just because of the way he moved his arm.
Mm-hmm. I'm running out of questions. You have more than me.
I got a bunch more. Okay.
Go down.
You also studied ethnomusicology in Eastern Europe? Was that it?
I studied folk music because of when I was in Hungary at the Kodály Institute in Kecskemét. And but the experience of being in Eastern Europe and learning Hungarian music, if you like, that was part of the course. It was one of those things where, because of the element of dance and folk music and folk dancing, you get a different perspective on the work of the Western musical masters, if you like. Certainly, the Eastern European things, some of the things I learned while I was there, based because of when you listen to Russian music, you think about how Eastern Europeans dance. You get a different concept of how things are supposed to work. So you get a different. It's not. Anyway, let's just say it was kind of eye-opening to realize that, oh, there's this other way of doing things.
Was there any conducting involved there?
Yes, conducting class. I took again from the Hungarian teachers that we had. My conducting teacher at that time was Peter Erdé, who was the director of the institute. He's now, if he hasn't retired yet, he's at the Liszt Academy in Budapest. And Peter was also a phenomenal conductor and musician. But like I say, they tended to have more of a, again, if you like, the patterns and things were very, I won't call them simple. They were basic. There wasn't a lot of extra fluff around the style and the approach to conducting that we were taught there. A lot of it, as I said, was sort of from point motion, conducting choirs. But what was the interesting challenge in those conducting classes was that it was all based on choral music. And we were only allowed to conduct our pieces if we could play 3 parts on the piano while singing the 4th one from memory. And when you could do that, then you got a chance to conduct it. So you had to know the music that well before you were allowed to actually wave your arms around. So that was a real challenge. But apparently, at the Liszt Academy, you had to be able to play 3 parts and sing one, and your teacher would yell, or say, okay, soprano, and you'd have to switch to singing the soprano and playing the other 3 parts. And then the teacher would say tenor, and you'd have to sing the tenor and play the other 3 parts from memory.
Wow.
So it was a whole other level of hearing and shifting and knowing what was going on in the music. So for us, it was easy. Yeah.
That makes me think I'm not qualified to do anything, if that's the case. You said that they would intuitively use from-point gestures, but they probably didn't know the word from-point gesture or really have an understanding of the acceleration into it.
Well, I don't think they even thought of it as from-point gesture. I think this was how we do it kind of thing. Yeah. So, so it was like the notion of sort of like just, touching a hot stove kind of thing, and there was a very, the basic conducting there is about a sort of like there's this place where all the beats happen, right? So you always come back to the windowsill or the ironing board or whatever you want to choose to call it. So tabletop.
What sort of students have come through the workshop since you've been teaching it, and what's like some common mistakes or problems that they've had?
Well, I think the biggest challenge here is when I started doing this, I said to Wayne that I thought that shakui was sort of the fundamental gesture that needed to be learned because it sort of sits in the middle of the spectrum of the tataki to the haniagi, if you like, but it has acceleration and deceleration. And so getting to that point, that's probably the greatest struggle is the shakui. So, I mean, it's not to say there isn't a struggle with tataki or haniagi or anything, but everything in my mind comes from mastering shakui. And once you have shakui, the rest I think are perhaps a bit easier.
So the biggest challenge is the first thing we learn then, basically.
Yes.
Does anybody master it quickly, or does it always take years?
I'm not sure. I would say that I've mastered it yet, although I know I'm much better at it than I was. And there's still times when I will still just do a 3 pattern and try to make a really good shakui. So.
I was going to say master. That's like, I don't think any musician ever masters anything. We attempt, right?
you get better at it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so crazy. You could spend like a lifetime just working on the acceleration out of a point.
Yeah. Well, even Professor Okabe was working on different conducting issues at the end of his life. So there's still more to be added to the method and more work to be done.
And I think the last one I had was, why is Saito better than other methods? Or is it?
Well, I don't know. Well, when you say better, I mean, then you start getting into, it's wars happen over what's better. The reason I prefer it is because I still think that it brings a clarity that I haven't found with. Well, that's another thing. Like, we call it a method. So, okay, this is the way we approach our musical problems. Okay, so and we apply certain techniques to the solution of those musical problems. And the reason I like doing things this way is that it provides us with solutions that work and work consistently. And that's why I don't think I won't see myself changing anytime soon. I have occasionally in rehearsal done things that one might expect other conductors to do, and the group either laughs at me or tells me not to do that again. So they and I did it because just out of fun, and I try not to be disrespectful, but I just want to see how the group will react, and they prefer that I do the things that I do. So and the reason, again, like I've said I think many times, is that when there is a problem, this way of doing things offers me different ways of solving the problem. And there have been times when particularly with the Saskatoon Concert Band, when we do something and it doesn't work, we'll stop and I'll say, I'll do something else. And I change my pattern, or I change what I do with my baton, and the problem goes away. It's gone, right? So I didn't have to explain it. There are times I still explain what I'm going to do, but there are other times when, to solve the problems, I simply do something different, and the problem is gone. It just vanishes. So, and like I said, before I started doing things this way, I didn't have the conducting repertoire at my disposal that would allow me to find 2 or 3 different possible solutions to a problem. And like I said, I don't worry about the group speeding up anymore, because I can now change what's going on, as long as I guess they learn to watch, and they know that if I'm doing certain things, this means this is the message: don't speed up, right? So.
Well, and I guess our last question for you then is, what is the biggest piece of advice you would give to someone who's interested in learning the Saito method?
You need to take a course, or perhaps several of them, from people who are qualified and can actually demonstrate it and teach it. I have the book. You might have the book. The book makes sense to me now, but only because I know that it's very difficult to use the book and understand what to do. In this respect, I don't know if it would be like with other methods of conducting, but it's like learning to dance. You can get a book that shows you the foot patterns on the page, but until you've actually danced the dance, you aren't really quite sure how it's supposed to go. And this is about something that's kinesthetic. You're moving your arm. So in some ways, pictures and words will never describe the motion of your arm. And this is where, believe it or not, language is limited. Just as I've often said that music and song cannot be described, visual art cannot be described with words, because that's why it's visual art. If you could say it, you wouldn't paint it.
So my advice is, if you're interested in the Saito method, and I'm not saying this because I teach it, I'm saying it because find someone who knows how to teach it. So find someone who can demonstrate it, teach it, and work with that person, and be prepared to put in many hours. It takes some time, but it's achievable, and I think it's worth it.
Very worth it.
I wonder how Professor Akabe would have reacted to the current group of people that keeps coming around. Like if it was, me, Brittany, Brian, Lauren, but all the Sean,
Adrian.
Adrian, yeah, all the
He
people.
he would have been very welcoming and very warm and very hospitable, and he would have worked with you for as long as it would take.
Yeah.
The man was a teacher. He was a teacher, and as long as you were prepared to keep working, was prepared to keep helping you.
Teaching.
Didn't
Yep.
Reed say he was pretty funny too?
Yes, actually, he had a very good sense of humor.
Yeah.
That helps.
Any good teacher needs to have a very good sense of humor. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Probably.
You can't get by without it.
That's all the questions.
Well, thank you. Yes. Well, thank you very much, George.
Well, I hope I've never spoken about it at this length before, so it's
You did great.
well, I hope that I have said things that are useful and helpful, and like I say, this is my personal take on it, and I'm guess now that I know what to do the next time someone wants to talk to me, I have to plug this in and make things easier on everybody.
So it sounded great once you put that in there. But
Yeah.
Well, I wondered about that when I was setting things up last night. I thought I made sure that the program was running and all that kind of thing, but I wasn't sure. And I did the test call thing, and I wasn't really happy with the test call, but it seemed to be working. So, yeah. Anyhow.
Yeah. No, this
All
worked
right.
good.
Great. Well, I'm glad it worked, and thank you. I'm glad we found the time to do this, and enjoy the rest of your day. It's Grey Cup Day here, our national football game day here in Canada today. So, and also Kids of Note concert this afternoon.
Oh,
so.
yes. Right.
Yeah.
They always do a Grey Cup Sunday. So.
I didn't think Canada had a football.
Yeah, the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, CFL.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that was sort of like the starter league where you get some experience.
Okay, well, I'm glad there's no serious CFLers sitting in this room. So, yeah.
Okay, I don't watch football anyway.